Welcome to another video from Demystifying Proposals. In this video, we'll talk about proposal tips, tricks, and tools, things you can use to make the proposal development process easier. Here are some tips and tricks. Here are some tips for things to avoid. Don't use terminology or technology the customer will not understand. Remember, the technical evaluation panel will likely include non-technical people. Don't use a past performance citation if the evaluation of your work from the customer for that work isn't stellar. Don't forget the government is small and CPARs may be shared. Don't forget to tailor resumes and past performance citations to the RFP requirements. Usually we do this relative to the statement of work or the performance work statement, but don't forget to check Section 8 for key personnel requirements. Don't forget to use the RFP's language. So if they use program, use program. If they use project, use project, even if it's a large project. Cybersecurity, is that one word or two? Life cycle, is that one word or two? Pay attention to what the RFP is telling you. Also, don't forget to ask the so what for what you are claiming as important. Have you included the benefits to the customer in what you learned from your previous experience? Some quick tips for getting to compelling. Call-out boxes. Use call-out boxes to highlight information you want the evaluators to know or to remember. Make call-out boxes visually interesting and use the same format for all of them. As an example, subject, what you did, benefit to the customer. That benefit to the customer is what you want the evaluators to remember. So the call-out boxes should reflect or reinforce your proposal win themes. You also want to make sure you include proof points. You use proof points to show the benefits of your solution because you've implemented it before elsewhere. Be sure the solution in your proof point is similar to that of the proposed solution. Every time you make a claim that your proposal is better, faster, cheaper, you should back it up with a proof point that includes a so what benefit for the customer. Our solution was implemented for X customer under X contract using X technology, which advanced their capabilities to X, or solved X problem they had been experiencing, or improved customer service from X to X. Here are some other examples, such as our solution was implemented for X customer under X contract in X days, which was X days ahead of schedule. Or our solution was implemented for X customer under X contract, saving X dollars in labor or time. Quantified results are always good, and CPARs are also good to support that a proof point is meaningful. Here are some other quick tips for getting to compelling around past performance and resumes. To show how the past performance is relevant, use the RFP statement of work as your quote outline for the past performances. In that way, you're making it easy for the evaluators to see how the past performance's scope and the scope of the work being procured are similar. For resumes, make sure that the summary of experience includes all the same language as the key personnel requirements. And then put the requirements at the beginning of the resume in one column, and in the second column, show a direct correlation of experience, usually starting with the word meets or exceeds, followed by how that person's performance meets or exceeds the requirements. If the key personnel are required to have a certain number of years of experience, be sure that their resume shows that many years of experience. We all have to truncate resumes because they're usually page limited, but be very careful that the resume still reflects the right number of years. So here are some quick tips to achieve responsiveness. Responsiveness is usually defined as how well the proposal reflects an understanding of the customer's situation. What's their mission? What's their vision? Why do they need this work done? One of the things proposal managers should emphasize to authors is to think about writing from the customer's perspective, We all have a tendency to write from our own perspective, but think about it from the customer's perspective. What goal does the customer have that we are going to meet with our solution? What challenges does the customer have that our solution will solve? Will the customer for this proposal understand the solution we tout for another customer as part of our proof points? If not, how do we show the connection between those two solutions? This information was likely included in the executive summary, but it's important that it be permeated throughout the proposal. One of the things that is really important for proposals is to have styles defined. I'm using Microsoft Word as an example because most of us use Microsoft Word in developing our proposals. Be sure to use the styles in Word when you set up your proposal template. These allow you to have consistency in formatting by applying the styles to all the text at each phase of the proposal process. These also allow you to have proposals that match your company's brand by using the same colors as your brand. At a minimum, you should include the styles on the following pages. We recommend that you not use normal as your proposal text style. Rather, set up a proposal text style that you use for all the main text within the proposal. Usually this is set to Times New Roman 12 point because that's usually the default of what RFPs require. If your RFP allows you to use a different size or a different kind of font, then absolutely set your proposal text to that style. But in this way, as people are writing, you can format their writing using the proposal text style, and it will automatically be the right size and the right color and the right font. And then we also recommend putting a 6-point spacing after each paragraph so the paragraphs aren't all bunched together and look like one big run-on blob of text. Heading 1 is the default style within Word. We just recommend that you set it to match whatever your brand for your company is. So using a different color than the proposal text, maybe making the font size a little bit larger than 12 point, maybe using a different font than Times New Roman if you're allowed. And that way, the heading 1 style will match consistently throughout your proposal. Heading 2 and heading 3 are basically the same. So you can set automatic numbering on these, or you cannot set automatic numbering, depends on your personal preference. But these are ways that you can, again, make it so that your proposal will be consistent once it's formatted by using the styles. Generally, we recommend not getting down to the level headings of 4, 5, and 6. That often will break up the proposal too much and make it harder for the evaluators to follow your solution. So try not to use headings 4, 5, and 6, but generally speaking, it doesn't hurt to define them in ways that match your company's brand and the requirements of the RFP. There is a default word style called caption, but we recommend that you set up a figure caption. This is used for below a figure and a graphic, and you usually use 6-point spacing after. You can use the same font as proposal text, or if you're allowed to vary your font for tables, you can potentially use your figure caption as in the same font. It really depends on what your RFP requirements are, so be careful that way, but it's something to think about. You can use automatic coloring, or you can use one of your brand color. It's up to you, depending again on what your company's brand or what you're comfortable with. And often it's italicized. You can use the automatic numbering for figures if you want to. I'm not going to explain how to do that because it's a pretty complicated explanation. But think about making all of your references consistent. So is it figure 1 or is it figure 1-1 and then figure number for the sections? make it consistent throughout the proposal in the same way. Use a colon after the figure number or use a dash after the figure number, whatever you want to do for your brand, but be consistent throughout. If you use figure caption, then if you use a table of figures, you use that figure caption as the guide for the table of contents for the table of figures. And that way, all of your table of figures will show up in the right place. You won't have tables and figures in the same table. By the same token, you can have a table caption. Often you can use the default caption for the table caption because the default caption usually has space before it, which is what you want to have for a table. I would recommend that your table caption and your figure caption be formatted the same way. So whether that's automatic coloring or brand coloring, whatever the font is, whether it's italicized, and again, however you number your figures, you should number your tables the same way. So if you do table 1, table 2, table 3 throughout the whole proposal, that's fine, you can do that. Or you can number them within section, table 1.1-1. Whichever you do for figures, do for tables. Whichever you do for tables, do for figures. Be consistent. It looks more professional that way. Header is also a default word style. It's usually set up within the top 1-inch margin required for most government proposals. You put your company logo on one side and the RFP information on the other side of the header. Whichever way you want to do it, if you put your logo on the left and the RFP information on the right, or vice versa, it's completely up to you in terms of your brand. But make sure that you're consistent across your proposal. So set up your header that way. The footer is also a default word style. Footers are set within that 1-inch margin as well. Most often, the footer includes the date. So the month, date, year goes on the far left. The page number goes on the far right. And then there's a standard disclaimer from the far that goes beneath those two elements. And here's the standard disclaimers here. Use or disclosure of the data on this page is subject to the restrictions on the cover page of this proposal, where you'll have the far language also on the cover page. It's good to set up the table styles. So table design is a way to set up so that your tables will all be the same in terms of the colors. So the heading row would be the same. You could have every other row be a different color. However your company's brand is, but using table design allows you to then format a table reasonably instantly by just applying that table design as a default. If you don't know how to do that, you can look it up. It's a pretty complicated process, so I'm not going to describe it here. But table design is something that we recommend you put in all of your proposal templates. Table heading is what the font needs to be for the heading row of tables. Again, you have to follow whatever the RFP's instructions are in terms of what font you can use. And usually you do not include any spacing before or after because you are trying to use as little space as possible, but you can if you have the space to put it in. Table text and table bullet, again, are just standard defaults that you should set up for your tables. Table text would be whatever the RFP requirements are. So that may default to a Times New Roman font, but if you can use Arial or Arial Narrow or something like that, change the table text style to match whatever font you're allowed to use. Again, this makes formatting easier at the end of the process. Callout heading and callout text are what we used for callout boxes. Usually callout boxes are just a little graphic box, maybe with a line around it, whatever your brand you want to set up. But if you set up a default callout heading, which is the font and the color that you want the callouts to have consistently, and callout text, again, whatever you want for consistency, then you can use those for formatting along the way. Remember, as much as we want them to, authors will generally default to whatever they're comfortable with or wherever they got the text from previously. So we're trying to make things as easy as possible when you're formatting the proposal by having all of these styles in place. Bullet is, again, a default word style, but you can change it. You can change the kind of bullet you have in front of it. Instead of just being a generic circle, it can be a square, it can be a dash, it can be whatever you want to do. So think about that and set up your style to match whatever brand you want to develop for your company. Bullet last is something we recommend as a style to put a space after your list of bullets. That way you don't have to go in and manually put in a 6-point space after each list of bullets. You can just use the style of bullet last. Graphic is related to our recommendation that you put graphics in tables. I think we'll talk about that in a minute. If you put a graphic in a table, then you want to have no space around that graphic. And if you set up a graphic style, you can just apply it, and then all the space that might be around your graphic should go away. So as we said, one of our tips for including graphics in a proposal is to put the graphics within a table. What you do is you set up a table that has 2 rows. You put the graphic in the first row, you put the caption in the second row, you remove the table's borders, you apply that graphic style to the graphic itself, you apply the footer or the figure caption style for the second row for the caption. And that way, the caption and the graphic stay with each other because they're both within that table. If the graphic is less than a full page, then set the table to around to let the text wrap around that graphic. Make the table as narrow as the graphic will allow. Be very careful not to cut off part of the graphic by making the table too narrow. But this again allows the text to wrap around the graphic easily, and it makes sure that the caption stays with the graphic, where using just a text box, sometimes those two things don't stay together. The graphic doesn't stay with the caption. If you put them in a table, it makes it a lot cleaner and easier to format, and makes it easier for the caption to stay with the graphic. Here are some suggestions or tricks for how to get to page count. It's a rare proposal that's within page count during the proposal development process, even at Gold Team. However, the proposal should be within the page limitations at White Glove. And of course, before submission, it has to be within page count or you will be non-compliant. So to achieve the goal of getting under the page limits, consider using some of the following tricks. Look for paragraph orphans. These are partial lines, usually not more than a few words at the end of a paragraph. And then try and work to reduce the sentences above so that you get rid of that orphan and save yourself a whole line. Some ways to do that are to replace your company name with we, or the company name and team as our team. That can save you a lot of space and maybe get rid of some of those orphans. Other ways to make the wording more concise include breaking up long sentences. Making shorter sentences is easier to read, and often you can reduce redundancy or make the language more concise. Put modifiers in front of nouns. So rather than saying the costs of the system, say system costs. Again, this is something that seems obvious, but when you're really looking to reduce your number of pages, these small tips can really make a big difference. Some formatting tricks is to reduce the space between paragraphs. Now, again, you have to be careful what the RFP requirements say, because some RFPs require you to have a full line between paragraphs. But if you can, if you set your default at 6 points between paragraphs, as you're trying to get down to page count, you can reduce that to 4 or 3 points. That gives you space still between the paragraphs, but it saves you some space. It still looks like there's space between the two paragraphs. You can also reduce the space around headings. A lot of times we put a fair amount of space before and after our heading 1, heading 2, heading 3 styles. Consider reducing that amount of space, particularly a heading that comes right before a text or right after text. It's okay if your headings are a little closer to text than you're used to seeing them perhaps in your styles. And then you can change the spacing in front of bullets so that they're all the way at the left margin. The default is usually 0.25. So think about moving your bullets over. And then, of course, look for those orphans, the same as you do on the paragraphs when it comes to bullets, and try and reduce the length of the bullet so that it wraps into a shorter number of rows. One of the things that we also recommend is a graphics library. A graphics library can be a valuable source of information for future proposals by reusing graphics that you've used before, especially things that are visually interesting. So almost every proposal, you're going to have an organizational chart. And there are lots of ways to put together a team's organizational chart. Don't forget to include your customer and your back office functions, but think about all the different kinds of ways you've set up organizational charts in your proposals over the years. And it may be good to have those as examples in your graphics library for somebody who's struggling about how to think about how to lay out their organizational chart. By the same token, you probably have some standard processes in your company, ways that you do things like managing a project, for example, if you're following PMBOK or CMMI, there's standards that you use. So quality assurance is one of the areas that there's often a standard process flow for. So think about developing that kind of a graphic and then keeping it in your graphics library for proposal reuse. Talent acquisition, hiring, interviewing, clearances. That's another very often included category in staffing. And a process flow for how that works can be very visually interesting and can save some space if you can get all of that information into a simple graphic instead of having paragraphs of text. So a best practice also is to tag each graphic with the proposal it came from. So down in one of the quarters of the graphic in a very small text, you put the prop name and O1, O2, O3 for all the graphics. In that way, when those graphics are in your graphic library, the graphic artist knows where the original artwork, which proposal it came from, and they can find that original artwork pretty easily. If you don't put that tag on the graphic, then it's more challenging for the graphic artist to try and find that original artwork, especially if you do a lot of proposals within your company. And then don't forget that this also means that you need to maintain that library. And one of the ways to do that is to save your graphics to the master library after each proposal has been submitted. And that way they reside in your graphics library for reuse. So in this section, we're going to talk about some of the standard tools for proposals. You likely have versions of these already, but we're just providing some examples. Every proposal manager should develop a compliance matrix for every proposal that they work on, but every proposal manager also has a different preference for how to lay out a compliance matrix. This is just one example of how we set up our compliance matrices. The purpose is not only to lay out the requirements, but specifically to show how Section L's requirements map to Section M's requirements by putting them visually side by side. This also allows you to see any requirements that are in Section L that aren't in Section M, and vice versa, any requirements that are in Section M that are not in Section L. And then you can use the notes column to explain how you're going to ensure that all of those requirements will be included, and then adding the section references once the proposal outline has been built gives you confidence that the outline is compliant, because the outline has then all of the sections in your compliance matrix and vice versa. It also serves as a handy reference at the end of the proposal process to double check compliance. So this is an example of a compliance matrix filled out. The first couple of lines are the proposal instructions for fonts, and maybe you have your submission information in there. Again, that's usually found in Section L, so it goes in the Section L column. Then, as we said, you put the L requirements in terms of the sections of the proposal next to the M requirements for the proposal. And it's very easy to see how those two are related to each other. Again, you can use the notes column if there are any notes that you need to add about how you're going to comply with that information as required. In this example, we didn't fill in the section numbers, but again, we recommend that you add the section numbers once you've completed your outline to the compliance matrix, and then you can use that at the end, and you can use it during your reviews to make sure that you haven't lost your compliance as the proposal process goes along. Here's an example of a proposal schedule. We do have a video on how to develop a proposal schedule from beginning to end in terms of starting with the RFP drop, ending with submission, and then how you do your color reviews in between those two critically important dates. This is an example of a graphics log. If your proposals are graphics heavy, then keeping track of the graphics that are being developed may be an important part of your proposal process. Sometimes the proposal manager is the person who maintains the graphics log. Sometimes that's a proposal coordinator, or sometimes that's the graphic artist. It's really up to you and how your process works, but having a graphics log can be very helpful, particularly for ensuring that the numbering of the graphics remains sequential. And of course, we recommend that you do number your graphics based on your proposal for reuse, future reuse. You may not end up using all of your graphics in the end. So that's another reason that the description and the author and where it's going to go and who's going to work on it can be a valuable tool, because you may develop graphics that go in the graphics library that didn't end up getting used, but they could be used on another proposal. So it's just something to keep in mind. This is an example of a production checklist. The production time between white glove and submission is often a very kind of chaotic and hectic time. You don't have a lot of time usually. You have a lot of things to get done. So having a checklist of all the things that need to get done and who's responsible for doing them can be an invaluable thing. So if you don't have one of these for your company, where you know who is responsible for, say, finalizing the cover letter or drafting the delivery email or confirming that you have signature authority or all of those things, then developing this kind of a production checklist might be a useful exercise for your company. It doesn't happen very often anymore, but sometimes the proposal has to be delivered in hard copy, in binders, in boxes. So make sure you have a delivery receipt for the receiving government official to sign that provides verification of delivery. This is an example of such a delivery receipt that includes all of the pertinent information. What proposal was it? When it was submitted? Who actually signed for it? All of that kind of pertinent information. Usually the person delivering gets the receipt signed. They bring it back to the company. The company then scans it in so that you can save it as a file into whatever system you save all of your proposal verification information. We hope you found these tips and tricks and tools useful. If you learned something from this video, please hit the thumbs up to like the video. Subscribe to our channel and click on the bell to be notified of future videos. And if you'd like, please leave a comment as well.